UFC 248 is on, and we are headed to Fight Island! Woo! Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Die Hard MMA podcast. I'm your host, as always, Clint McLean. And the best news in the world is what I have to bring to you. Dana White has dug his heels in. UFC 249 is happening. And like we talked about on the show last week, you heard it here. I thought Justin Gaethje was going to be a half-decent replacement there for Khabib. That is, in fact, what is happening. We've got Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje, and they did slap the interim title on top of that fight. You know what? The interim title doesn't do a whole lot for me, and I said that it kind of doesn't make sense. After hearing a couple arguments for it, it makes a little bit more sense. I mean, Tony was the interim title holder. He's been stripped. Who knows when Khabib is getting out of Russia? And like we talked about, the casuals need to have that belt on the line. Otherwise, they kind of don't care. So it's just that extra little sprinkle to give that fight a little bit more pop. And it's really funny. If you follow me on Twitter, I feel really proud of myself for the meme that I put out, because everybody on the planet was basically saying, give me Tony Khabib or give me death. There is no alternative solution. No fight is acceptable beyond that. Postpone it. And as soon as Dana White announced that it was Gaethje, I didn't see a single bad review. Every single person on Twitter was like, oh my God. Everyone's so excited about this fight as soon as it happens. I called that shit. I was like, I'll watch that fight. That's a great fight. Welcome back to the show, diehards. I am so pumped. I'm in a great mood, as you can tell. I'm doing tape study. We're watching line movements. We're locking in bets. I mean, this is what we live for. This is what we have been missing, and I couldn't be happier. The time has come. We are getting up and running. All the other sports around the world are still shut down. MMA is back, and if Dana White has his way, he is purchasing a freaking island, and we're supposed to get 2 straight months of MMA action, and that would make yours truly just so happy. If we got nothing but 2 solid months of fights with all this stuff going on, that would give us entertainment value, that would give us stuff to study, stuff to bet on, ways to make money. I mean, it would just be phenomenal for all of us. So I am so pumped. And I've got a very fun episode for you this week. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Let's dig in. I want to give a special shout out to our listener, my main man, Michael Lunday. Thank you so much again. Always supporting the show, always supporting the podcast, especially in these trying times when there's not a whole lot going on. There's not a whole lot of content to be had or put out. Very much appreciate everything that you do for the show. Thank you again, my friend, for the kind words and the tip. As always, I wish you and your family well, and all the listeners out there, I hope everybody's staying safe. I hope you're keeping your families close. Hoping we hunker down and we beat this thing. It will pass soon. Thank God we've got MMA back. We have got to say thank you to our sponsors, the boys over at GOAT Capital Sports. That's at GOAT Capital Sports on Twitter. Give them a follow. Let them know that Clint sent you. They've been sponsoring the show for some time now. We love them. They're sports bettors themselves. They cover basically every other event or sport out there besides MMA, and in fact, they do also cover MMA. They do their own betting cards, and if memory serves correctly, I think they said they are planning on betting every single fight for UFC 249 in celebration of this event. So be sure to check them out. Head on over there, see what their picks are, because if you want action on literally every single fight, it looks like they are going to have that covered as well. I may have to step my game up. Let's give a shout out to some of the new subscribers. We have Maurice David, Juicy Jays, and the Sound of Violence. Welcome to the show. Thank you all for joining the Die Hard Horde. We are so happy to have you here. I am looking forward to spending time with you over the next couple weeks, breaking down fights and making some cash. I can't wait to get my teeth sunk in. I'm starting my tape study already. We have one bet that we have made for UFC 249, and I'm not going to go too in-depth on my breakdowns of anything that we're looking at for this week, because we have a whole podcast that we have to fill next week, and I'm very excited to break down every single fight on this card. First off, let's take a look at the whole card. They did announce the entire slate. Obviously, at the headliner, we've got Ferguson versus Gaethje. Our co-main event is Andrade versus Nunes 2, the rematch. That one's got an icky feeling for me. We laid the wood with Rose Namajunas last time out, and she was dominantly the best fighter, and then she just got absolutely destroyed by that raw power of Andrade, and the line has gotten wider. It seems like everybody saw that fight and went, Namajunas is clearly the better fighter, and so now money is pouring in on her. Everyone's calling that a fluke knockout, and the physicality and the strength of Andrade is just something. It spooks me, and the mental instability of Rose Namajunas spooks me as well. So that one's got me very, very, very cautiously looking at it. We've got Hardy versus De Castro, which that's a great fight. This is the kind of fight that I think Hardy absolutely needs to be in at this point. It's not a guy who's a top-tier contender or anything like that, but a very dangerous opponent, someone who's the right level for Hardy for us to really gauge where he's at. We've got Luque versus Price 2. Oh, the violence. I can't get over this fight. This fight is absolutely incredible. I know the first one was good. Price is never in a boring fight. I love that guy. But the rematch, both these guys have improved drastically and their careers have gone, skyward, both of them. This is going to be a fun fight. I love that fight. Stevens versus Qatar is still on the card. That's another banger that I was looking forward to. Glad they kept that one together. We've got Ngannou versus Rosenstruik, which that fight is phenomenal and should give us the number one contender for the heavyweight division. We still have Jacare versus Hall. They kept that one together as well. That's one that I've had my eye on for quite some time. Then my boy Alexander the Great Hernandez is taking on Omar Morales. That is another good fight, I feel like. Alexander Hernandez, everyone's got questions about him. People are wondering about him after the Trinaldo fight. Maybe he's not all he was hyped up to be. And this Omar Morales, he's undefeated. He's only had one fight in the UFC. That's another measuring stick. Really good, solid fight, I feel like. I really need to brush up on Omar Morales. I've only looked into him once or twice, so this is going to be fun for me to dig my teeth into there for my research. Then we've got Vera versus Borg, which is a really interesting fight. This is one of those ones that I never really saw coming, right? Because Borg was always trying to be 125. Now he's being forced to go up a weight class. Vera is a guy who's always been up a weight class, and I don't know. I just never in my brain, I never saw these two guys getting together. So this one kind of took me by surprise, but now that I'm thinking about it, I kind of love it. So very, very much looking forward to that fight. Then we've got Johnson versus Worthy, which that's a crazy matchup too. This is one of those ones that was kind of thrown together for this fight card. So another one that I don't have a whole lot of opinion on at this point, but a ton of money has come in on Johnson after that opener, and he's a big, big favorite at this point. So I'm curious. I have a hard time trusting that guy. So that's going to be another one I've got to look into. Kind of a similar story with Eubanks and Moraes. I mean, this is a fight that was on the previous card. They held it together for this card. So, good that they kept this one together. But at the same time, Eubanks, huge favorite, absolutely massive favorite. And you'd think she should be the favorite here. She should have it, right? But she's also just completely untrustworthy. You cannot trust this girl. She shits the bed. She gasses out. So another one I'm going to have to sink my teeth into. And then we kick the night off with Spann versus Alvey. Boy, are they just trying to bury Alvey at this point, aren't they? That's going to be a banger while it lasts. Phenomenal card. I can't wait for this thing. And this is one of those ones. Now it's turned into something that, even though there's no UFC on, I was expecting a card that we were going to be kind of foaming at the mouth for, because there's nothing else to watch, because there's nothing else to look forward to. We don't know when the next card is coming, so we'll take what we can get. But no, this card is phenomenal. From top to bottom, this is a great, fun, action-packed card. They've got bomb action fighters, people that are just going to go to war with each other. I'm very, very much looking forward to this. I think it's going to be highly entertaining there for us. So let's talk about a couple of things. I want to just kind of chat for a minute about the fights coming up. I've locked in one bet. If you follow me over on Twitter, the first thing that you need to know is I have already made one play, and that is on Justin Gaethje. I feel like these lines are just a little bit out of whack. The other thing is I'm kind of watching the market move on this one, and every single time Justin Gaethje gets anywhere up in the realm of plus 155 or plus 160, he gets hammered. So I'm watching, I use bestfightodds.com, and you can see all the books that are on there, 5 Dimes, Bet, DSI, Bookmaker, Bovada, Pinnacle, all of them. And all this money coming in on Tony Ferguson. And then every single time that line peaks for Justin Gaethje, it just gets hammered. And that had me knowing that I had the right line. So I pulled the trigger on Justin Gaethje at plus 150. Right now, you can get him anywhere from plus 130 to plus 170, depending on what book you have and where you're at. The middle of the road, I guess, is about plus 145, plus 150 is where he's sitting right about now. So that plus 150 is still out there. Some of you might be able to snag a little bit better. I think that's the value play. At this point, again, I'm not going to go super in-depth on my breakdown because we got a podcast to do next week that's going to hold everything. But I just feel like that this is a much closer fight than people are giving it credit for. Yes, Tony Ferguson is absolutely the man. Yes, he was going to fight Khabib for the title. Maybe he was a good matchup for Khabib. Maybe he was a guy that might be able to beat a guy like Khabib. But now we're talking paper, rock, scissors. And remember, MMA math doesn't work. So just because Tony might be the guy to beat Khabib doesn't mean he's going to match up well or be able to beat these other fighters. The forward pressure, the leg kicks, and the raw power of Justin Gaethje, I think, is something that's going to cause a problem for him. Tony Ferguson is a volume fighter. He's got to have time. He's got to wear you down. He's got to cut you up. That's how he beats you, by picking you apart that way. And he volunteers for a fighter fight. He steps into the fire and he is willing to take whatever you can dish at him to wear you down. And you cannot do that with a guy like Justin Gaethje. The raw power of Justin Gaethje, I think, is going to be what ends this thing. Tony gets caught in virtually every fight. A guy like Khabib doesn't really have the knockout power to do anything with that on the feet. So you didn't really have that concern with his chin or anything like that going up against Khabib. I think it was going to be a grappling heavy type of fight, and that would have played into Tony Ferguson's favor if that's at all possible against a guy like Khabib. But when you're fighting a guy like Conor McGregor or Justin Gaethje, who can get your timing, who can get your range, yes, they don't have the cardio like Tony Ferguson does. I don't know many people who do, but they've just got to land one or two big shots. That's all it's got to take. The fact that Tony has an even slightly questionable chin going up against the hardest power puncher in the 155-pound division, I've got to take that dog shot. I think this is a very, very evenly matched fight. Tony Ferguson is obviously going to be the more technical guy. As far as mixed martial arts goes, he's more well-rounded. He's got more tools. He's got more weapons. He's got more experience. But Justin Gaethje just has that raw animalistic ability to stop a fight at any point, and that's why I took him in this spot. I don't see Tony going to the wrestling. Even if he does, we've always heard about Justin Gaethje's legendary wrestling takedown defense ability. I mean, he uses his wrestling in reverse. He wants to keep the fight on the feet. Tony's not really going to go for the grappling. He never has been that guy, even in a fight with a guy like Donald Cerrone. Like, they never even sniffed the ground. Tony likes to take the fight as it comes to him. If you want to fight a certain way, he accepts that and he wants to beat you there. So I don't see him suddenly diving on a single leg or something like that against Gaethje. And even if he does, do we know that he can take Gaethje down? I really don't. I don't know that. Gaethje's an excellent wrestler himself. I have no clue if Tony would actually be able to get this fight down if that was his game plan. Now, once it gets on the mat, Tony's obviously got a huge advantage with the submission game. Again, we don't truly know how extensive Justin Gaethje's grappling is. He could be phenomenal and just be able to stand right back up without a problem, but you always got to watch out for Tony's Darce chokes. That's a huge threat. The biggest thing, the only guarantee I can say is this fight ain't going the distance. I mean, we've got these two guys that are just phenomenal output type of guys, and 5 rounds. It's not a 3-rounder, it's a 5-rounder. No way does this thing get to the cards. Justin either gasses out and gets subbed, in my opinion, or the referee stops it due to a cut, or Gaethje is gonna KO Tony, and he's gonna do it in a big way. So those are the only two ways that I see this thing playing out. I think Gaethje clips him. I think Gaethje clips him at some point, and especially considering the times that we're in right now, you got to think the referees are probably going to be quick on the trigger. They don't want people going to the hospital. They don't want people getting unnecessarily hurt or damaged. And, you know, you can't really blame them for that considering everything that's going on right now. So if Tony gets hurt, I think the referee will step in and end it soon. But same thing on the flip side of that. If Gaethje gets cut up, the referees also might be way more inclined to stop it. So I mean, I think this thing ends in the second round. I don't know. Gaethje obviously doesn't have the gas to go with someone like Tony for a full 5 rounds. We know Tony can go 5 rounds, no problem. So if it gets into the third or the fourth round, I think the chances of Tony winning go phenomenally up. And I can't wait. I just simply can't wait for this fight. This fight is going to be phenomenal, and I'm very much looking forward to it. I'll roll those dice on that plus 150. If this line continues to get out of control, I mean, we've got a whole week to go, and I'm sure the big hitters haven't even laid their bets down yet. So as this thing gets rolling, if more money comes in on Tony, I'm very, very tempted to put a second unit down on Gaethje, and not because I'm uber confident in Gaethje. This isn't like hey, this is a 2 times play, this is my 2 big unit bet, my max play. No, not like that, but simply from a line value standpoint, I should have waited. I'm kind of bad at reading the market moves. I think people are always seeing the same thing that I am. So I pulled the trigger on Gaethje because I thought people would be enticed by his power, and I didn't want to miss out on that plus 150. So I threw my money down, and if this thing gets back up to plus 175 or something like that, I may have to go again because I just think that's crazy. I think that's absolutely wild for it to be up there. The other point I wanted to make, I'm just giving you the whole breakdown at this point, sorry. Justin Gaethje, you have to stop him. You have to absolutely sever him from his consciousness to stop this guy. And that's something that I don't know that Tony can do without a submission. He's not a power hitter. Tony Ferguson hasn't been a power puncher ever. He's a volume guy. He will slice and dice you, and unless the referee steps in or you have like an eye swollen shut or something like that stops the fight, he can't just hit you on the button and put you out. He couldn't even put Cerrone out that way. So, I mean, that's not going to happen against a guy like Gaethje, who's just a violence machine. He's a marauder. Until you completely cut him off, he's going to keep coming forward, and he carries that power with him the whole time. His wars that he had with Alvarez and Poirier, I mean, they were bombing on each other all the way into the third round both those times. So if Tony can't swell or cut him up or submit him early on, there's a decent chance that Gaethje can still land that bomb. And since I don't see Tony necessarily being able to take this fight to the ground outside of like a rocked scramble type of situation, that's one more factor that I feel like plays in Justin Gaethje's favor. He's also coming in on short notice, which I know a lot of people are saying is a negative, but he's been training. His teammates were on the card in Brazil, so he's been in camp. He's been helping his teammates out. He's been keeping ready. He's got a little more weight to cut than he would like. I listened to his interview with Brett Okamoto today, but it's not like he is out of shape. He's not like peak. He said he's about 95%. So for like a short-term fill-in, 95% is pretty damn good. I don't know if there are many people who fill in on short notice that can say they're 95% when they step into the cage. So I'll take 95% in this kind of a situation. Plus, Tony wasn't ready for Gaethje either. So Tony may be in shape. He may have had a full training camp getting ready for Khabib, but he was getting ready for Khabib. This is an insanely different fight. So you can't say that Tony's going to be at 100% either, because these guys have just as much time to game plan for each other as the other one does. So that's all I've got for you as far as the picks and breakdowns for UFC 249 for now. Keep an eye out on my Twitter handle at DieHardMMAPod. I tweet out my action, so if there's anything else that I feel like I need to jump on, that is where you'll find it. Otherwise, tune in here next week, a week from today, on Tuesday night or Thursday morning, depending on where you... Wednesday morning, sorry. Skipped a whole day there, apparently. Depending on where you are in the world, that's when the podcast comes out every week. So tune on back in for the show, and we'll break down the entire card top to bottom, and I'll tell you all of my action, and I'll tell you all the places that I plan on betting. So next up, I've got something exciting for you all. I was able to do an interview with a very, very nice man by the name of Nate. Nate Evans is another podcaster. Well, I'm not sure if it's a podcast technically, but he does a show called A Fighter's Legacy. And what they do is something really, really, really cool. They're telling the untold stories of former UFC fighters. They hit up retired fighters, legends of the sport, people who you probably know, especially if you're an older fight fan like myself. Guys like Boss Rutan, Antonio Nogueira, Randy Couture, Kevin Randleman, and they've got these in-depth interviews with these guys where they tell stuff that they've never told before. It's super intriguing and interesting, and I had Nate on the podcast, so I'm going to go ahead and play my interview here with Nate for you all so you can hear a little bit about their show and what they do, and then we'll circle back at the end of that for some fan questions, and we'll wrap this show up. All right, diehards, I've got something special for you today. We are joined by a guest on the podcast. We have got Nate Evans coming to us from A Fighter's Legacy. He joins us on the podcast today to talk about a really cool project that he is working on. Nate, how's it going?
Great, Clint. How are you?
I'm doing good, about as well as I can with everything that's kind of going on in this crazy world. But we got some good news. UFC 249 is happening, so I guess I'm a little better off these days than I was a week ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's exciting to be seeing some fights here soon.
Absolutely. I couldn't be more pumped. And we got a damn good fight headlining it too. After losing, Khabib, Tony, I guess Gaethje is probably the second best option for me. So I'm pretty stoked about that. But why don't you just kind of introduce yourselves and really tell the listeners about A Fighter's Legacy. Let them know kind of what you guys do over there.
Great. Thanks. Well, in A Fighter's Legacy, we interview legendary fighters, and we create audio biographies that you can listen to in your car or at home or wherever you listen to podcasts. I mean, we're on Apple and other apps. But we want to try to bring their lives to the attention of everybody, for whoever's interested in the history of mixed martial arts, because there's this whole vast ocean of information that we just haven't really explored yet. And my co-host, Rich Donahue, and I, we want to bring that to light for fans. And what better way to do that than to hear it from the fighters themselves and the people who were there who have firsthand knowledge of it.
That is so cool. I love the project. I love what you guys are doing. And from the looks of it, it seems like you're kind of starting in the old school days, almost kind of like Pride or like the early UFC days. Some of the guys I know that you've done interviews with, like Mark Coleman, Boss Rutan, Dan Severn. I mean, you've got one of the Nogueira brothers, correct?
That is correct. Yeah. We have Rodrigo Nogueira, otherwise known as Big Nog.
Okay, Big Nog. There we go. You know what? I always mix those two up with their names. I have to do Little or Big, otherwise I don't know which one I'm talking about.
Yeah, a lot of people are in the same boat with that, And but yeah, we are starting with older fighters, and we're moving into newer people as we go. But it's kind of part of it is we want to help inform some newer fans and maybe older fans as well on these people who they might not be as familiar with, and give them a starting point to explore their fights and explore, information on them, and to bring good stories from them, because a lot of these stories haven't been told. So if we can be a conduit to get the stories from these people and bring them out to the fans, that we're happy to do that.
I think that's so cool. And especially like for me, I got into the UFC right around the Forrest Griffin era. I didn't catch the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, but I caught on to him when he was challenging Rampage Jackson for the title. So I was one of those people that kind of had to go back and dig through all the old stuff. And I can't imagine the people that were like brought into the sport of MMA by a guy like Conor. They have no clue where this sport came from. So going all the way back, and then hearing about guys like Boss, who's just awesome, and then like Randy Couture, Kim Shamrock. I mean, those are the names that we built this sport on, and I think it's super cool that you guys are starting at that point to really get this thing going. What kind of stuff do they talk to you about? Tell me kind of how the interviews go with them.
Well, a lot of times we're talking about their fights, about their lives, and we talk about their childhood as well. But a lot of times we're talking about key moments in their careers, key moments in big fights, like with Randy. I mean, I started watching the UFC back like UFC 1, and I wasn't really hardcore into it until about around 2000 when I was in college. Some friends and I went to Atlantic City, and we saw Randleman versus Couture, and we saw Hizo versus Couture 1 and Tito versus Tanner, and those fights really brought us into it. So when we're talking to these guys, we're really trying to focus on key moments. Like with a Couture, we talked a lot about Couture versus Hizo 1, which a lot of people probably don't know that fight, but it's really one of the best fights in the sport's history. And it's really maybe the first real hard back and forth fight where where Couture almost finished Hizo in the first round. Hizo almost finished Couture in the second round. And we talked to Couture and Hizo about that to try to get some insight on, you know, how did this huge turn of events come about? And we actually were able to exchange information, give Couture information from Hizo and back and forth on that because, like, for that fight, for example, Hizo, little bit of background on Pedro Hizo. He's one of the best strikers in the sport's history, the founder, really, of that hard leg kick. He and Marco Rujas. And Pedro Hizo was one of the mentors for Jose Aldo and kind of helped coach him on that to give you, some information. But Hizo was known for getting bad cuts, and he had a terrible cut from the first round. And his cornerman, Marco Rujas, told him, you have to finish this fight in the second round, otherwise they're going to stop it. And Pedro had his fight against Randleman for the UFC heavyweight title stopped from a cut. So there's good reason to be, mindful of that and worried about it. So Hizo just poured it all out on Couture in that second round. And, not even Big John and Randy knew that. So to be able to translate that information was really cool. But a lot of the questions really come down to, how did you feel at this moment in this fight? Like with Vanderlei Silva, when he knocked out Jackson the second time, and Jackson was there in the ropes. We talked to Jerry Millen, who was the VP of Pride at the time, and he talked about how he was ringside, and Jackson went through the ropes, and blood just spilled out all over it, spilled out all over people sitting there at ringside. And then we talked to Silva, and we asked him, what did you think about when you saw him there on the ropes? And he talked about it. He had great insight on it. He talked about how he hopes, like 1,000 years from now, people look back on this sport as an art and how this was his art. This was his contribution, like how people do a painting or a sculpture. And I can't really, say everything that he said because it was a very, lengthy explanation, but it was really cool. So just finding these key moments in their careers. And because Rich and I have followed the sport for so long, we know these moments. We don't need to go and find it in an article. We don't need to go look up, what were the biggest wins of their career, because we saw those happen.
Yeah.
So we can just basically go off the top of our head a lot of time, like, hey, like with Silva talking about the Chuck fight, Silva talking about, the Jackson fights, the Crow Cop fight, the Hunt fight, and just trying to, get that insight, that you can get more from them than you can from any article, obviously.
Mm-hmm. That is super cool. I love the idea of getting inside the fighters' minds. I had a couple of fighter interviews on the podcast a while back when I was kind of getting the ball rolling. I learned real quick that it wasn't my forte because we do, as you know, we do sports betting here on the podcast. So it really didn't pan out for me that sometimes we would be betting against the people that would come on the show. So I kind of left that behind, but I love the idea of doing it. And it's really cool to hear you, talk about that. And I'm going to have to go back and binge through basically your entire show, because these moments sound awesome. And even for me, a lot of this stuff is going to be really new information. Because like I said, I'm a little bit of a later, MMA baby. I wasn't there for a lot of that stuff. You said you started all the way back at UFC 1, right?
Well, like I started watching it then, I just, I saw it on the, the shelf in the movie store and watched it, and I watched all of those, and for me it was really just, just something I was just kind of into it a little bit. I wasn't really, too fixated on it. It wasn't until I started going to those shows when I was in college when we met the guys in the crowd. We met Liddell and Randleman, Tito and Middletich and those guys in the crowd. And then we'd go back because back then these guys would just sit out there and talk to people. And it's so funny because when I talked to Don Gold, who was one of the head of marketing guys for the UFC for a long time, I was talking to him for Hoist Gracie, who will be in season 2. And he knows Hoist very well. They're good friends. And he said how one of the keys to their marketing back then was to put guys strategically throughout the crowd so people would, gravitate toward them when they saw them. And we saw these guys in the crowd, and, we were one of the people who knew them. A lot of people didn't even know who they really were. People were just kind of there to watch blood and guts, but like we knew who these guys were. Yeah, right. Just bleed, that guy, yeah, those guys. But we would talk to them, meet them, and they're super nice people, super down to earth people. They're not like barbaric gladiators. They're normal people. And then we'd go back and we had the video game in our college dorm, and we'd play the video game. And it's like, I'm I'm playing as this guy who I just met, which is like you created that emotional attachment. So from there, we just started watching all the shows and, going to events when we could. And, it just kind of came from that. And here we are 20 years later. We were looking into social media and maybe doing a talk show and stuff like that. And I started getting more into seeing what the temperature was out there for fans. And a lot of people just don't even know about these guys. And when you talk about greatest of all time conversations, which I don't really care for GOAT conversations, I just don't think I think it's futile. But, a lot of people don't even consider some of these older guys to be among the best ever. When they talk about Big Nog, a lot of them talk about, oh, the guy that got knocked out by so-and-so. Well, yeah, that was at the end of his career. Like, what about when he, beat Bob Sapp and Heath Herring the first time, when he beat Crow Cop? I mean, I think some people have a misconception of certain legends because they went too long. Because, frankly, a lot of these guys didn't start getting paid big money until the end of their careers. Like back in 2000, 2001, they weren't getting that much, nothing like they are today. So they kind of had that's one of the reasons why they kept fighting longer than they should have, because they're just getting offered too much money. When at the same time, here comes the next generation of fighters who are great fighters, obviously, they're fantastic, but they're beating all these older guys. So it's like, oh, like, that guy's not that good. He lost to this guy. It's like, well, it's kind of like, Larry Holmes getting beaten up by Mike Tyson. Like, these guys are at the end of their careers. You can't just judge it based off, that small sample size of fights.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think one of the biggest examples that I've ever seen of that, and I think will be the biggest example for a long time, is like BJ Penn. The kids these days, all they're gonna know is BJ Penn getting flatlined by Yair Rodriguez. All they're gonna know is the YouTube video of him getting knocked out outside of a bar in Hawaii when he's drunk off his ass. No one is gonna remember the BJ Penn who had the guts to step up 2 weight classes and fight Lyoto Machida. Like, nobody's gonna know the BJ Penn who licked the blood off of his gloves after he beat a man half to death in the cage. I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I think it's a really cool thing to have these, basically give the fighters the opportunity to get themselves out there again, kind of almost a second birth later in life. That's really awesome.
And I think those are two great analogies with BJ Penn, because, I mean, you're looking 15 years ago now, he was probably pound for pound the number one ranked guy in the world. In fact, he was the number one ranked guy in the world for a couple of years. And this was when, really the golden age of Pride in '03 and '04, when Fedor and Nogueira and Vanderlei and, Jackson were at their height, and Sakuraba. And, here's BJ Penn in the UFC, going up weight classes, like you said, to fight Machida. And Machida was like 220 pounds back then. He was not a light heavyweight. He was a heavyweight fighter. And here is Penn moving up from 155 to, I think he topped out at like 185 or something like that. I mean, like, he is like filling himself full of water to make that weight,
Soaking wet. There was no way he was anywhere higher than that.
Right, exactly. The guy probably had, water bottles in his pockets to make that weight. So, I mean, for him to go up and fight those guys, I mean, I'll never forget where I was when I watched him beat Matt Hughes, and at that time, like, Matt Hughes is another guy who doesn't get his due. Like, a lot of people kind of just overlook him because he got beaten by St. Pierre, but he's probably the second best welterweight of all time, if not certainly the third. I mean, I don't know who you put in there. Woodley is probably a good competitor. Lawler's probably up there. And of course, these guys, Usman, Colby, Masvidal now, they're all, certainly making their case, and their stories aren't done yet. But I mean, but to see someone like Penn, who, frankly, I mean, it's just been embarrassing over the past, or in recent years. And I'm a huge BJ Penn fan, and I don't want to call him an embarrassment because he deserves more respect than that. But that's how people perceive him. They see him as this clown.
Yeah.
And I mean, that guy 15 years ago was pound for pound the best in the world. And I still think he's the best I still think he's the best lightweight of all time. And yes, Khabib is he's making that argument. I think he's the only one right now making that argument. I mean, Tony's right there, of course, but to me, they have not eclipsed BJ yet. And I don't care what BJ does tomorrow. If he goes out and gets beaten up by my dog, it doesn't mean he wasn't the best of all time when he was at his best. But now we're getting into GOAT arguments again, and I don't want to be that guy. Like, I don't want to seem like that jaded old guy who poo-poos newer guys. I mean, these guys today are probably better than those guys were then with the training and the science and that stuff. But I look at it as not era versus era, but man versus man. Like what if Fedor was in his prime right now with the science today, with the training today and the technology? Would
Yeah.
would he be number one in the world? That's a hard question to answer. I think he probably would, but that's just my personal opinion.
And those are the arguments where it's both infuriating and fun
It is.
because you're never going to get those kinds of answers. And I absolutely agree with you when it comes to the GOAT conversations that you've got to go man versus man, the level of competition. That's like saying Demetrius Johnson is the greatest of all time. He didn't really have anybody to fight. And then when a truly elite competitor showed up, well, he took that loss. So it's hard to say that he's the greatest of all time after, hindsight has kind of shown his competition wasn't really up to the level that we're kind of seeing today. So yeah, it's an interesting and infuriating rabbit hole to go down sometimes. But I think BJ is just all in all going to be a long time, a very sad story when it comes to MMA, and I hope some people learn from BJ Penn because we're seeing guys like Diego Sanchez right now just kind of recreating those same exact mistakes. And that kind of concerns me. But I mean, we're getting a little off topic. I want to kind of circle back to, what you guys talk about on the show and stuff like that, if that's all right. So you guys have a full season one out at this point, and you've already got season two locked and loaded. Is that right?
That is right. So with season one, we have, and like by the way, I think Diego Sanchez is a great analogy. Like I'm worried about the guy. I love Diego Sanchez,
I'm scared for him.
and I am worried about him. But with season one, we did Kevin Randleman, Ken Shamrock, Randy Couture, Big Nog, Bas Rutten, Dan Severn, Mark Coleman, Vanderlei Silva, and those are available right now. And for season two, we'll probably be out over the summer. We're doing Hoist Gracie, Anderson Silva, George St. Pierre, Dan Henderson, Don Fry, Frank Shamrock, Henzo Gracie. And those we were expecting to put out next month, but the pandemic has really slowed things down with getting some of the interviews. We have all of the major guys interviewed. We have a few that we really want to get in there, and people are just out of their element right now. People are kind of hunkered down trying to, ride out the storm here. So we don't want to be a pest in any way to them. So we're just kind of waiting for this to, clear up a little bit, and then we can get a few more interviews done, and we can get it out there. But it's all pretty much done, but it's not quite where we want it to be, because one of the things with this is once this is out there, it's out there forever. This isn't topical. This is something that you could binge years from now. But so do we want to rush it out a few months early just to get it out there? We don't think it's worth it right now. So we want it to be the best it can be. And if that means we're going to wait 2 or 3 months, then, I guess that's what has to happen.
Mm. I think quality is something that people appreciate. I don't think that's a bad choice whatsoever. I think people that, especially if you get in there and you start really enjoying the content that you're putting together, there is nothing worse than a TV show that second season sucks after an amazing first season. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
if you fall in love with the concept or you really enjoy what somebody's doing, and then the jokes just kind of don't hit as hard as they used to, or the character seems to be a little different than they were the first season, like that kills. So I think you made the right call. I think, delaying things a little bit to make sure season two is polished is something that, like you said, people will appreciate that for years to come, rather than just, oh, hey, we got some content right now.
Right, exactly. And like a show that kind of makes me think of that was that show True Detective on HBO. Like I loved the first season with McConaughey and Woody Harrelson. Then the second season came out, and the actors Colin Farrell and Vince Vaughn are just fantastic, obviously. But I wasn't the biggest fan of the writing itself because they rushed it out there. But then the third season came back, and the third season I thought was outstanding because they took some time off, and I think it was a different writer for season two. So a few different things there, but like you said, you know, we don't want to be that show where the first season is great and the second season isn't great. We want it to get bigger and better. And because also with season one, we were just kind of still learning as we went, and we had some growing pains along the way. And there were times when we, felt good about what we were doing, but it was also we're still kind of figuring out what exactly this was that we were doing, and we knew what we wanted to do, but to have a vision and then the execution sometimes you can't get it executed the way you want it to be. And
Hmm.
we're very happy with the way it came out. We're very proud of it. We do think it came out the way we want it to be, but we think season two will be even better because we have more experience now. We are more well versed in doing this, and we're more practiced. Like we're better now than we were. So season three should be better than season two, and as we go, it should get better and better.
Hmm. And I kind of just want to touch on that for a minute. So how did this whole thing get started? You talked about having a partner. How did you guys have the idea to start this podcast and this show?
Well, my my partner Rich and I we talked about doing a talk show, and that was part of the original idea. And then once we started looking at some of the, kind of like I said before, like what people thought in general was kind of surprising. So it's like, wait a minute, these people don't know of this person. They don't recognize this person's body of work. And then we started talking to some fighters about it, and we wanted to do a documentary on Kevin Randleman because he was one of our heroes from way back in the day. And once we started talking to people for that, it kind of snowballed into a bigger project. And then we kind of thought, well, this niche is not out there. Like no one even knows this stuff. Like I don't even know this stuff. And we've watched the sport for 20 years, so the majority of people don't know these guys in general, let alone know these key moments from their life, which we find fascinating. And so we can bring something that is not out there right now. And to our knowledge, like no one's doing anything like this right now. There are some shows where they talk about certain historical pieces, and I think those are cool. But I don't know of any other show that is talking directly to these fighters with all exclusive interviews, getting this insight straight from them. So
Hmm.
once we found that niche, it's just hard to turn away from it. I mean, it just kind of I wouldn't say it fell into our laps because we did come up with it and dug it up on our own. But once it started rolling, people realized that we're here to do good, honest work, and we're here to pay tribute to these legends and to tell their stories. So once we saw the cooperation from them, it just kind of snowballed from there, and it just kind of grew from that.
That is really cool. Well, I think you guys
Thanks.
are doing an absolute service. I think this is something that people need to hear and need to see. So I think this is I know I've said it a bunch of times. I feel like I'm a bit on repeat now, so I apologize, but I really do think the project that you guys are doing is super cool. Um, Going back to season 1 for a minute, who do you think your favorite interview was so far?
Favorite interview? There are moments. I mean, I'm not gonna lie that there are moments where I was a little starstruck, and it's just like, like I'm sitting there talking to my wife and kids. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and and I look down and there's Randy Couture calling me, and it's like, oh my god, I can't believe he's calling me right now.
Hmm.
So having that nervousness was exciting, but as far as the um, interviews themselves, I'd probably say Mark Coleman. He's someone who that when I was a fan, back back in his heyday, back in the late '90s, he kind of came off as this big tough bruiser, maybe not the most jovial guy that in the world. He kind of had that persona of just being a big bruiser, being a big tough guy. But
Hmm.
then when you talk to him, he's really one of the funniest guys I've talked to, and he has great stories. He's very personable. Um, and there are people who who you think are really cool, and they are really cool, like Boss Rutan, super cool guy. Hensel Gracie, super cool guy, very personable. Um, Rodrigo Noguera, very nice guy. And that's another thing is a lot of these people are really nice, good people. And someone might think, well, they're fighters, But the thing is, you can't get to that elite championship level caliber by being a jerk to people because you can't do it on your own. And someone might say, yeah, well, it's man versus man in the cage or woman versus woman in the cage. But a lot of people help them get there. And
Hmm.
nobody wants to work with someone who's impossible to work with. So, so all these people in general are good people because they get people to rally around them. But as far as the best interview, I say would probably be Coleman. Boss was really good though. Boss and Coleman are just fantastic storytellers. they like to tell the stories, and it's
Mhm.
different when you're talking to someone who loves to tell a story as to someone who just doesn't generally do it. Like when I was talking to Dan Henderson. Dan Henderson's super cool guy, very nice guy, very funny guy. He's not as talkative as some of these other guys, and he's a great interview. And really one of the as far as someone that I would hang out with, he's probably one of the guys I would want to hang out with most because he's just kind of my kind of guy in a lot of ways. But to but to talk to someone like Coleman who um, has story after story and it just never ends. I mean, stories that you never hear of, like of him going out to dinner with executives in Pride and doing these crazy things at these restaurants, whatever. Just all sorts of crazy things happening. Um, but also to hear them talk about Kevin Randleman, which was kind of how we started talking to Coleman, was for Randleman because they're so close. To hear
Mhm.
him talk about someone who was so important to him, and to uh, take such pride in making it a good interview for his friend was poignant, but also very refreshing to see that lighter side of him.
I'm gonna have to go back and listen to that one now. The one that I think I'm looking most forward to listening to, which I haven't yet, is Boss Rutan's interview. My wife has a little crush on Boss Rutan, and I think he's one of the guys you mentioned, is very good at telling the stories and really wants to tell the stories. I think that comes through when he does like his commentating gigs and stuff like that. He's very well spoken. He talks extremely well. He knows how to put a sentence together. And I actually really loved that movie that he did. Did you ever watch Here Comes the Boom,
Yeah,
where
it's
he's
great. Yeah,
the coach?
yeah, Nico. Yeah, he's great. He is
That's
he is really like a modern day Renaissance man because he can do all these things really well.
yeah.
He's a very good instructor, a very good teacher. And if you watch his
It
videos, like I had his Boss Rutan workout thing back in the day, I don't even know, 15 years ago or so. And I used to do that, or maybe it's 10 years ago now, but I used to do that workout. And so when I was talking to him about it, he had some pointers and stuff like that. It was just kind of, I don't think we're even recording then, but he has great stories, like the story about him knocking out five bouncers in a bar in Sweden,
oh
and
geez.
one of them was a police officer, like an off-duty police officer who wasn't in uniform, and how he was bullied as a kid, bullied terribly as a kid because he had eczema and terrible asthma, and he had like uh, blisters and terrible rashes all over his body. And but he would go in the woods and climb up in the top of a tree, and they would chase him in the woods, and he would go from the top of one tree to another tree to another tree like he's Tarzan. And these kids would like try to climb the tree after him, but he would like shake the tree, and one of them fell and got hurt. And it's like just these crazy stories you never even heard of before. I mean, stuff that
Wow.
like some of these things um, you're just not prepared for. So when they say it, it's like you almost don't even know how to follow up to it. It's so outrageous, like with Kevin Randleman, he was star college wrestler at Ohio State, and when he was in the national championship, his coach Russ Hellickson told the story, and Mark Coleman was his assistant coach. He was very close with Randleman during that time, and uh, Kevin, when he was in practice the week before the national tournament, separated his jaw, and they had a hard time getting it back in place. And the team doctor said, or the doctor at the hospital said, he's out of competition. You can't let him wrestle. And he was the defending national champion. And
Oh
Hellickson
wow.
said, and Russ Hellickson said, look, this is his decision. I'm not going to take it away from him. And Kevin wanted to compete, and so they went to the national tournament. He's in the semifinals, I think, not the finals, but the semifinals, and went to the mat. Jaw came out, and they couldn't get it set back into place. And they took like a 15-minute injury timeout, and they're trying to get it set back into place. The doctors are there, trainers are there, trying to set it back into place, and they're not able to. And the time is almost up. I don't even know how much time was left, like a minute or 30 seconds or something like that. And they're like panicking. And Randleman just pushed everybody out of the way. And they said he dropped down to his knees and slammed his face off the mat a couple of times and knocked it back into place.
Oh
And then
my gosh.
he got back up and he felt it. And he said, "No, like I'm good. Like it's all good." And then he went on and won the next two matches, won the national tournament.
Wow.
Isn't that just unbelievable? I mean, like,
Yeah.
I mean, like, how do you even follow up to something like that?
those guys are just made of something else. It takes a special kind of crazy to be a fighter, especially at the level that all these guys were, and the old pioneers and stuff like that, when this stuff wasn't nearly as safe as it is now, or as
Right.
regulated as it is now. I can't imagine some of the stories that those guys tell, stuff like that you're talking about. That's just absolutely insane. Normal people like us can't even comprehend doing something like that. I'd be in the ambulance on my way to the hospital.
Right. I mean, like, like us, like mere mortals, like I didn't even know what to say when they said that. It's kind of like, you know, it's like going back to like UFC 1. I mean, think about it. They said there are no rules. You're getting in a cage to fight. Who's signing up for it? I mean, it takes a special kind of person to sign up for something like that, especially when you don't know. And this is also when something that's interesting about Hoist's documentary is there was this mystical ideas, these mystical ideas about death strikes and these special moves and
Mm-hmm.
these things that could just end your life with like one tap to one spot. And you know, the UFC showed that all that is not, really true at all. But when they're getting ready for UFC 1, there people are backstage. Big John tells a story for Hoist's episode coming out that when he was at UFC 1, a lot of people were backstage. They didn't really know what was happening. Is this fake? Is this like some souped up professional wrestling gig, or what is this? They don't really know. But a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people were like backstage, like pumping their guys up, like you the man, like let's go. But then the first fight was between Gerard Gordeau and Taylor Tooley, and that's when Gordeau kicked him in the face and knocked his tooth out in the crowd. And Big John said when that happened, like everyone just went like dead silent backstage. It was like a graveyard, as he said, and people were like, puckered up, like oh my god, like this is really happening. Like I'm really going out there, and so like it just put everybody on notice. But like that's where it started. Like that was the first fight, and it was really like a blood sport in a way. It was kind of like a glorified tough man in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
people just didn't know what to expect, and to see where we are here 25 years later, it truly is remarkable. But we also want to pay due to some of those people who started the sport, and also talk to those people. Like we talked to Gerard Godot. Like Hoist Gracie said how Gerard bit him during the championship fight. Like Gracie fought Gerard Godot in the championship match at UFC 1, and he said how they're on the match. There are only two rules, and Hoist talks about it in the episode. There are only two rules, um, and one of them was no biting. And but even if you did bite, there's like you're not disqualified. It's just more like, hey, don't do that again. So like Hoist called it like a gentleman's agreement. But he said once he took him down, he bit him. And Hoist is like, hey, like you bit me, and Gerard's like, yeah, so what? You're like, what are you gonna do about it?
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked to Godot. I asked him. I said, Hoist said you bite him. Like, did you? Like, what happened? And he said, yeah, I bit him. And he said, like I didn't want to be in that position. And when he took me down, I didn't want to be there. And when that happens, like I'm gonna bite him. Like so matter of factly about it. Didn't even think twice about it. It's like no big deal. And I was just stunned. Like you're talking about biting the guy like it's no big deal. But it's just a different world then. It's just a different sport. And you know, hopefully our hopefully our show and our episode on him kind of brings that to light.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I guess that's kind of like these days the, eye pokes and fence grabs. It's kind of the same thought process where you kind of get one freebie.
Right. Well, I think that was the other one, no eye gouging. I was trying to think of the other one. I couldn't think of it. I think no biting and no eye gouging were the only two rules then. Like there were groin strikes. Like Keith Hackney punched Joe San in the groin 4 or 5 times. I think that was UFC 3 or 4. But he punched him. Yeah, I think it was UFC 4. But I mean, he hit him in the groin like 4 or 5 times. Like I mean, not by accident. Like on
Yeah.
top of him, straight up punching him right hook straight to the groin.
I
So
can't
that was
believe anybody ever thought that was a all right rule.
I know, but hey, I mean, it happened, and they were okay with it. So it's just, you know, I'm glad they got rid of that rule, though. I mean, you can't go doing that to people, obviously.
Definitely. That
But
is hilarious.
but I mean, to hear these stories from these guys and to hear them reminisce is kind of cool, because they haven't told these stories in a long time. Maybe some of these stories they probably never told. Like Ken Shamrock told this story in his book, but he had never told it verbally. How when he was a child, he was, you know like a delinquent, and he was in a foster home, and it was a terrible situation for him, and he ran away, and he lived as a runaway for months, and he robbed several stores, strong armed robbery, and he was wanted by the police, and he got stabbed behind a 7-Eleven, and he
Wow.
woke up handcuffed to a hospital bed. And once we told that story, the Sun in England actually picked up on it and wrote an article on it, which was really cool. But Ken had never told that story verbally. He wrote it in his book, like I said, but to hear him tell it and to hear um, the emotion behind it,
Hmm.
it kind of takes them back to those moments, and to take them back to those moments that they want to talk about is something special, I think, because that's another thing is we're just telling the stories that they want to tell. I mean, if they're telling us, and they want those stories out there, so we're not digging up trash on these guys and trying to make headlines that are bad business. We want to do good work. We want to do good, honest work for these people, and those headlines and stories come along with it. We've had articles in the Sun, in Bloody Elbow, and MMA Mania. So we know that we're getting those stories generated, and we're putting them out there for fans, but they're also coming from those fighters. We're not digging up dirt on them.
And that's super important. I mean, what you're doing is obviously really awesome. And I think celebrating these guys and their careers and listening to their stories and not being 30 for 30 on them, not digging up stuff that they're going to feel bad about or putting them in awkward positions. They don't want to answer questions. I think that's key. I think that's really awesome. And it seems like you guys are coming from a really good place while you're doing this.
Well, that's kind of part of it too. Like we're not TMZ here. We're not paparazzi. We're getting it from them, and we do ask some hard questions now and again. Like I asked Rideau, like, what about biting? I'm like, what happened with that? Because we
Hmm.
do want to, you know, we do want to get to the facts. Because these are and I mean these are the stories that are important. But if someone doesn't want to talk about it, we're not going to press it. We're not here to put someone in a bad position. I mean, Gordeau had no problem talking about it. He didn't even think twice about it. So, why should we be reluctant to talk about it if he's happy to talk about it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, again, I love the project. I'm definitely going to go back through and listen to everything that you guys have put out so far. You mentioned
Thank
all
you.
the people that you've got on season one. Who do you have lined up on season two?
Well, season two is it's with Hoyce and Anderson, George
Hmm.
St. Pierre, Dan Henderson, Don Fry, Frank Shamrock, and Henzo Gracie. And we have one more person that we don't have completely locked up yet, but hopefully that person comes through. I don't want to talk about that person because I don't know if it's going to happen right now because of the pandemic. But we've done interviews with all of those guys, and we've pretty much done all the interviews we need. I mean, we literally need like 3 or 4 interviews for all of the episodes, like total. So um, we do have a couple that we could release. We probably could release Hoist and George right now, but we want to release it as a season, so it's a combined package.
Hmm.
And for season three, we have some people that we're talking to. We don't have a full commitment from them yet, but you know, season three is looking like it's gonna be just as big as season two. So we're super excited for that. And season three, well, we're still wondering when season two will come out. So it's hard to speculate when season three will come out. We could be, in this pandemic for longer than expected. We just don't know.
Sure, sure. And I mean, it seems almost like a generational shift going from season one to season two. Frank Mir, he was like my first really true favorite fighter. I got fascinated, like most people with MMA, with Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. When I first saw it, it was just such a foreign concept to me, and I loved everything about it. And he was one of the only big men who had a dangerous guard. He was one of the only big men that would legitimately work off of his back. And that was something that just totally blew my mind. It immediately drew me to him. And Frank Mir was, I mean, Forrest Griffin was kind of my first favorite fighter, but then when I really started to get a feel for MMA and everything in general, I just drifted towards the heavyweights like most people do. And Frank just completely like he was the one that really took over. And I had the opportunity to actually meet him at a grappler's quest type of thing when I was competing at the low level, and that was a big starstruck moment for me as well. Kind of like what you were talking about. I don't really get starstruck. I've met, a couple of like actors, singer songwriters, those kinds of people, and it just never did anything for me. I didn't think I was capable of getting starstruck, until I went to a Grappler's Quest and I met some of the fighters that I was a huge fan of, and then I turned into a little fangirl real quick.
Well, that's one of those things. Is like I never thought I was either until like I looked down at my phone and they're calling me, and it's like, whoa, like I'm sitting there talking to my wife, watching the TV, and like a Hoist Gracie calls me, and it's like, honey, like I gotta take this call, like it's Hoist Gracie, you know. But with Frank Mir, we interviewed Frank Mir for Big Nog, and he was just a great guy, super good guy, very well spoken. I mean, you've heard him probably commentate in his podcast. Phone Booth Fighting is a great show, but I remember him when he beat Tim Sylvia, when he broke Sylvia's arm, and seeing his forearm bulge out like that. My co-host Rich went to see Frank fight Tank Abbott back in like I don't even know when that was, probably maybe 03, 02 or 03. I don't even remember really. But this was Tank's big return, and Tank had a huge following back in the day. I mean, he was an icon in the sport.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whether you like him or not, I mean, the guy was a big deal. And when he came back, a lot of people were saying, Tank is back. Tank's gonna knock out Mir, and Mir toe looped him in like 2 minutes, and and just made quick work of him. But when Mir talked about Nogueira, he said how he felt terrible when he broke Nogueira's arm because he had Nogueira in the lock. He knew Nogueira wasn't going to tap. He
Mm-hmm.
wanted the referee to stop. I think it was Mazzagatti, and it might have been Mario Yamasaki. I'm not sure which one.
They let him be a warrior.
Right. But I mean, like Mir was upset because like this guy doesn't know to stop it, and Nogueira is going to make me break it. Like I kind of had to break it, and he was distraught about it afterwards. He felt bad, because he really respected Nogueira and he was a big fan of his. And then he later on he knocked him out, but Frank was a big fan of his, and it was definitely upsetting for him. So to hear that was a bit surprising for me. I mean, not that Frank was this bad guy. I mean, I know Frank's a good guy, but to hear that he was upset over having to hurt his friend, guy that he admired, was an eye opener.
That's not something that you see a lot. And that reminds me, I can't remember who the fighter was, but just recently somebody got in trouble for shoving a referee because they had someone severely rocked and hurt, and the ref didn't wave the fight off. They made him go in there and punch him 2-3 more times in the face before they were willing to step in and stop it.
Yes. I know that fight you're talking about. I can't think of what it is right now either.
I almost want, for some reason, Jacare is sticking in my head, but it was a bald guy, but I can't remember if that was him or not.
I almost thought it might have been Lawler, and like one of those Lawler fights, but I can't think of it right now.
Oh, see, and I don't know if Lawler would do that. He's such a savage. He likes hitting people.
He does. He's also a big sportsman. He's a good dude. When he lost to Askren, I mean, he was super upset, obviously, for good reason. I mean, he wasn't, he didn't submit, but then he immediately said, Herb, it's okay, you're a good guy, like he didn't, I mean, he let that initial emotion pour out, which is just kind of uncontrollable in the moment, but then he quickly calmed down. He quickly came back to earth form and said, no, it's okay, you're a good guy. I know you're a great ref, but, now I know like Robbie does like knocking people out, so.
Yeah, for sure. I think he loves that feeling, and I love watching him. I think Robbie Lawler is one of those guys that we're really gonna miss him. You know what I mean? He's one of those guys that's such a brutal fighter. He's so fun to watch, so fan friendly, and like you said, he is a sportsman. So he's not just a savage who's looking for blood. He knows when to stop, and he's one of my favorite types of fighters. You know what I mean? And I think. Unfortunately, I think the division has passed him. I think he's getting to that gatekeeper standpoint, the tail end of his career. But championship Robbie Lawler is somebody who I just feel we never got enough of.
He had a great era. I mean, I remember watching him back in like 2003 when he knocked out Tiki Gosen, and he was this like young buck, and he was like 22 at the time or something like that. Maybe even younger. I don't even remember, but. But now, I mean, he's getting a little long in the tooth. I mean, his best years are probably behind him. But he's someone who we're definitely going to be looking at trying to do here sometime. Once his career concludes, and because we like to do people who are retired, so we can tell their whole career.
Mm-hmm.
We'll probably move into doing some people who are still active at some point, maybe in a season or two, and maybe have it be a shorter version to try to bring people closer to them. but we're not really certain of that yet. That's just a bridge we're going to cross when we get to it, because there's so many great fighters right now who are coming close to retirement, like Lawler, like Cerrone, like many others, like Penn, who we're looking to do, like Diego Sanchez. These are
Hmm.
people who, you know, we have our eye on these guys, and we want to tell their stories. But their stories aren't finished yet. So once their stories are finished, then we're going to reach out to them, and we feel like we can connect with them. We've connected with the biggest people in the sports history so far. So we are confident that we can get to whoever we want to get to. It's a matter of, are they ready to talk about these things, and
Hmm.
are they at the point where their whole story is concluded? And if we get to do some younger people, then that'd be cool too. Maybe we do a shortened version of it, so to say.
I think that would be really cool. But I also think that what you guys are doing right now is is really perfect. And there's so many fighters out there who are retired that you haven't even scratched the surface on.
Right, exactly.
A lot of people who are currently fighting, they're gonna have stories to tell. And I mean, I don't think I would be opposed to, like, if you did like a before and after type, if you did, like you said, a shortened version, and then maybe have them come back on the show after they have finally hung it up. But it just, the amount of legendary retired fighters that are out there, the list is so long. And
It
with you
is.
guys doing what you're doing now, I'm sure, I got to imagine that fighters that are currently working with you are going to help put you in touch with other names.
Well, and like a lot of times it comes down to that, because we'll be talking to one person about another fighter, and then we get that person to sign up for their own episode. Like we're talking to Daniel Cormier about Dan
Mhm.
Henderson, because they fought years ago, and Cormier is just a great interview, such a great guy, like an even greater person than he is a fighter, like if you can believe that, because he's one of the best fighters of all time, obviously.
Yeah.
But even a better person than he is a fighter. And he said how Dan Henderson was one of his heroes, as a fighter and as a wrestler, because he grew up wrestling Greco-Roman and freestyle, and Dan was on, the Olympic team, so that's what he aspired to be. Is that he
Hmm.
wanted to be like Dan Henderson, and to hear him talk about it gives a lot more, uh, makes it a lot more impactful, because you can hear the sincerity in his voice, as opposed to me trying to say yes because if it's just me talking, then I'm just giving you facts you can go get off Wikipedia. But if it's him telling the story, then you can get that emotion, that true connection. um but but when we talk to Dan, but when we talked to Daniel about Dan, I mean, I asked him, would you be available for yourself? And he said, yeah, I mean, contact so and so, we'll set it up, and you know, hopefully that comes to be.
And he is such a personal guy. He's another one of those dudes that we're talking about that is just a phenomenal storyteller. I love DC on the mic. I think he's got a very bright future doing commentary for the UFC for years and years and years to come. I think that he is going to be an amazing interview for you guys if that gets done after he finally does hang it up, because I mean, he's shared more and more with like Ariel Hawani recently, and his stories are just phenomenal. He knows how to tell them. He knows how to deliver a line. He knows when it's funny. He knows when it's serious. And I can't imagine, that'll be a fantastic episode for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy with he has a lot of layers, and he has a lot of talents, obviously. But also, I mean, some of the people that we did for season two, I mean, like Dan Henderson's episode, I think is going to be fantastic. I mean, he has a lot of great stories about him and Hector Lombard. He has some really good stories about that. Some words that they said to each other that I don't know if I can say on your show, but
Go right
um,
ahead. Say
you
whatever you
know,
want.
but I mean, like, but he told Lombard, I'm gonna fuck you up, and he said, like, I don't normally say that, like, I don't say that to people, but like he really pissed me off. But to hear Dan tell this story, I mean, I can't do it justice. But also with like George St. Pierre talking about how the UFC stopped sending him belts. Like he defended his belt 8 times. Well, he defended it. Yeah, make sure I have this right. He defended it 8 times on his main run when he beat, the when he beat Hughes the second and third time, when he beat Hughes the third time. The second time I think he wasn't champ yet.
Hmm.
but Shields and Diaz and Condit and all those wins, they didn't give him the belt for all those fights, and it kind of pissed him off a little bit, So to hear that is kind of interesting too.
For sure. So, I just want to kind of wrap up with a couple questions, if that's all right with you.
Yeah.
If you could pick one person to interview on your show, who would it be and why? And then I want to know who your favorite fighter is. If it's different from who your ideal interview would be, who's that?
Well, my favorite fighter, I guess I'll answer that one first because that's the one that came to mind. My favorite fighter of all time was Randy Couture. He was the one who kind of brought me into the sport when I was there. Like when I saw Couture versus Hezo 1, like my chest was right on the gate. We were right up front. Like I could have thrown a piece of gum into the ring, and we could hear those leg kicks hitting Couture. And I mean, if you go back and watch that second round of Couture versus Hezo 1, I mean, it's really one of the most brutal rounds in the sport's history. And I bet 90% of the fans today don't even know of that fight. But we were just some college kids. We had nosebleed seats. We walked right down up front and probably shouldn't have been there, but we did because we didn't care, and no one cared anyways. So, except for the people we're standing in front of, probably. But you know, um, but Randy was probably my favorite fighter. Um, but also I had some others who were right there, like Big Nog and Vandalay and Fedor. If I could pick anyone to interview, it's so hard.
Hmm.
Um, as far as classic guys, probably Fedor, maybe Sakuraba. But
Okay.
also these newer guys. I mean, like, I would love to interview, Cerrone or Diego or Cormier. I
Oh,
mean,
Cerrone.
yeah, those guys would be great to talk to, or Khabib, I mean Connor. I mean, all these guys. But if I were to pick one, as far as where we are right now doing classic fighters, I'd probably say Fedor. And we're actually probably pretty close to talking to him at some point. Like where we we have a connection to talk to him, and we do expect that to happen at some point. It just kind of depends if we can make the stars line up.
Oh, that's awesome. That is exciting to hear. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show, Nate. I really appreciate it. It was a blast talking to you. I do want to kind of give you the floor for just a second. If you've got like a Twitter handle or like your website, anything you want to kind of shout out, the floor is yours. Go right ahead.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So our our Twitter handle is the same as Instagram. It's just at A Fighter's Legacy. We're on Facebook at A Fighter's Legacy. We also have a Facebook group, A Fighter's Legacy MMA UFC MMA and UFC group. Our website is afighterslegacypod.com. You can find our web hosting page at afighterslegacy.podomatic.com. And we're on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, YouTube, basically all of the main players we're on. And season 2 should be coming out probably here in a couple of months. Hopefully this pandemic here subsides in the next month or so, and we can get it out in June. That's kind of what we're planning for right now.
That's great. And you know what? For anybody listening to the show that hasn't done it yet, these interviews are really cool. And people are just starved for content right now, especially MMA related content for people like yourself and, myself. Until those fights on the 18th happen, we're going to be foaming at the mouth for something MMA related. And your guys' show is a perfect thing to go binge between now and then before the release of season 2. Thank you again for coming on the show, Nate. It was a blast talking to you. And we will definitely follow up probably at a later date.
That sounds great, Clint. Can't wait to talk to you again in the future. Best wishes to you and everything. Hope you and everyone stay safe.
Right back at you.
So do me a favor and go check out a Fighter's Legacy. Go check Nate and the boys out. They're doing a really, really cool project, and this is the kind of thing that you love to see. These fighters don't have a whole lot after their careers are over unless they were very smart, tucked away their money, invested, stuff like that. These are the legends of the sport, and we get to share in their glory after they're all done. We talked about guys like BJ Penn and stuff like that after, at the ends of their careers, they lose all that glory. They lose all that shine. And this is an opportunity for us to really go back, relive some of that, and appreciate who they were and what they did for us. So really, really cool thing that they're doing. Go check them out. Now, I want to get to some questions here. I threw out the bat signal and said, hey, if you've got any questions on the podcast, go ahead and fire them for me. So we've got a question from Lags _ the capper on Twitter. He says, with a win, Justin should fight Khabib next. 2 parts. Would that be Khabib's first fight out of quarantine? And also, if Tony loses, Can he make a comeback for the belt, and who would his next opponent be? So, one, no. I don't think that would be Khabib's next fight out of quarantine. We've seen what the UFC does as far as their interim titles and shit like that goes. We have seen what kind of craziness happens in the world of mixed martial arts. Nothing is ever as it's scripted. Nothing ever goes the way it's planned. If Justin Gaethje beats Tony Ferguson on the 18th, my prediction is that Conor versus Khabib 2 happens. I think that everyone wanted to see Khabib versus Tony. And if the wind goes out of those sails, yes, they will do everything they can to promote the highlight reel knockout of Justin Gaethje. However, we all know that the moneymaker is Conor Khabib 2. And with the roadblock of Tony Ferguson out of the way, the UFC will find a way to make that happen. I almost guarantee it. I don't know what the conditions will be. I mean, you got to wonder, like, let's say Justin Gaethje's face gets all diced up and he's going to need time to heal. So the UFC is going to go, well, Khabib can fight in 2 months, man. Conor, you ready? Step on up, because Justin Gaethje, he can't go for a while yet. They'll make that fight happen. I promise you they'll find a way to make that fight happen. I think Khabib's next fight is Conor, and then Justin Gaethje fights for the title after that, or to unify the title after that, I guess. So as to the second part of your question, you said if Tony loses, can he make a comeback for the belt? I don't know. I really don't think so, because Tony, the UFC has never done Tony Ferguson any favors. He's been on this unreal win streak, and he's not a guy that they've chosen to promote correctly. If it wasn't for the feud or the rivalry, I guess, with Khabib, this wouldn't really even be a thing. So I don't know that he ever claws his way back to a title shot. It's taken him so long to get one already. Do you think they're just going to chuck him to Conor or something like that if he takes the belt? No, because then they'd need the trilogy with Conor Khabib, right? So, like, I mean, I guess if Gaethje maybe takes the belt, he just got KO'd by that guy. That's not going to happen. I mean, the road for Tony Ferguson to get back to the title from here is damn near impossible, in my opinion. It's a lot like Tyrone Woodley. They're not just going to hand it to him. He's done everything they've asked him to and more. He was the interim title holder already, and somehow they still never gave him that fight. Somehow he still never got his shot. So beyond that, I don't know what he can do. I don't know what they will do. I just don't see it happening, unfortunately. And I'm a huge fan of Tony. It'd be an absolute shame if that was the case, but I just kind of don't see that panning out for him that way. So we have another question from Dave Patrick over on Twitter. What can Andrade do to stop the striking beatdown she received the last time that she faced Rose? Short answer, I don't fucking know. I have no clue. Rose is miles ahead of her in that area, and she made that apparent. Can Rose do anything to prevent another KO slam? Yes. So Rose's defense was attacking that Kimura, and that's what put her up in the air in the first place for Andrade to go for that slam. They've got to come up with some sort of other defense. She opened herself up to that, and when Andrade figured that out, that's when she started hammering. And I mean, she's going to have Vietnam flashbacks if she gets up there again. I don't think the Kimura defense is going to be the answer. They'll have to come up with something a little new or different for that. This time I'm going to try and watch film so I can be, so I may be way off base, but it seemed like Rose already expected the slam last fight. Yes, she did. And you could see her tucking her head. You could see her angling off to try to get away from it, soften the blow, make it not quite as impactful, and it just didn't matter. She did everything that she could to avoid that shot, and she still got severed. Like, she still almost had her head taken clean off. So I don't know. That's my whole hold up with this fight, because the fact that it's happening over again, I just don't freaking know. I mean, I know Rose is the better fighter. Rose is the better fighter in every aspect of this fight, but we saw what happens last time when she's up against a powerhouse, and the fact that Rose has the mental hurdles that she does, there's a very, very real possibility that something very similar happens again this time, and she might just be even more susceptible to it because of it happening the first time. So Yeah, yikes. I don't know. That one's going to be interesting. We've got Sean Shelby's Shoes. I love the handle. Giving me a question here. Very interesting talking point. We all want to see Tony Khabib because we believe Tony could give Khabib some very serious problems. But is Justin versus Tony a better fan-friendly matchup? And the answer is yes. I.e. less crotch sniffing. Yes, if you don't like the grappling aspect of MMA, or especially the wrestling heavy aspect of MMA, then then Khabib is simply not your boy. That's all he does. He just mauls you until you break down, and that's all this fight was going to be. I think this one would have been exciting from the standpoint that Tony offers something completely different. He can play off of his back. He can attack with elbows and submissions off of his back. He scrambles well on his feet. He's a very good wrestler himself, so there's no guarantee that Khabib would just continuously be able to take him down. He might be able to reverse some of those positions, defend some of those takedowns. I mean, it would have been a very, very fun fight, but obviously it would have been a grappling heavy fight. This is very clearly a much more fan-friendly fight. Justin Gaethje may not have the recognition, he may not have the name that Khabib does, but as far as fight styles go, it does not get better than Justin Gaethje. He goes out there to kick your legs off and to kick you in the head and punch you in the face until you fall over or he dies. Those are the two options. That's all he does. That's all he cares about. And he is okay with taking quite literal brain damage to go put on a good show. He is on record saying such. So Gaethje is as fan-friendly as you can possibly get in a fighter. So yeah, this is 1000% a more fan-friendly fight for everybody to watch. And that'll do it for this one, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I am so beyond stoked for UFC 249. I cannot wait for next week. Let's get on the tape study. Let's attack those lines. Let's make our bookies pay. We are going to make some cash. The Die Hard train is going to get back on track and get rolling. We've had a long enough break. I am chomping at the bit for some action. Let's go. If you've got some questions, follow up, anything like that, hit me up on Twitter at DieHardMMAPod. I'll be happy to chat with you over there. Everybody stay safe, chill out at home. We will be back at it before you know it. Look for the podcast next week. I'm looking forward to talking to you again and breaking down every single fight on the card. Let's freaking roll.